Welcome back to a brand new episode of The Laundry. So, today I'm joined by Kenneth Enholt. You're the director of Financial Compliance Group and the head of Denmark. Welcome to The Laundry. So, you have an extensive background within finance and the work with AML. And so, to get the audience to know you, I'm just going to jump straight into asking a couple of questions. And I want to know, what's been the most impactful moment you've had working with AML over the last 10 years?
Yeah, well, I've been in this business for 22 years and the past 7 years as a consultant. When I started the journey in 2010 with AML, I've seen a massive investment, massive cases that have developed over time until now, these 12 years. So when I look backwards, I can have a lot of war stories. Some I can say, some of course I cannot say, but I can see that where we started with just like this is our driver license, have a picture of that. Mm-hmm. But if I should take some concrete thing, I would say it's like the follow the money. When I saw on the screen where the money was set in and then where they ended. Like, for instance, I saw this vicar recruitment that says, we come in interim positions and see that they buy like olive trees in Greece, or they buy olive trees in Greece, or some pizza floor in Italy, etc. Why should they do that? It doesn't make sense. And to have that critical mind, or you see all the money gets collected from the morning, and then in the afternoon they got transferred to another bank, and then the pattern comes up again the day after. To be that close to all the things, that's really massive.
That's interesting. How do you follow up on cases like that? If you see a recruitment company and you see they start investing in like olive branches or olive trees in different countries, like how do you then take that on to the next stage and, as you say, follow the money and I guess maybe offboard the company at some point as well?
Yeah, well, I think it was very difficult in the beginning because for 10, 12 years ago, it was not that common to go through, not trust the client. You were not aware of, maybe you were a bit naive at some point. So to go directly to the client, say, well, why are you doing this? This is not looking normal. That was a bit awkward, maybe also some embarrassing, but also a barrier you need to force because you need to know this. And then after you have talked to the client and you have to say, well, we cannot have you as a customer anymore. That was a bit scary.
Yeah, how come?
Yeah, because you were very direct and they should know you're investigating. And of course, you wanted to keep the relationship with the customer because you earn money on them. Mm-hmm. So to get that directly and so close to the client, saying we don't trust you, it was like that's normally the police that are doing that. I'm just a banking.
And have you seen that change over the last years, like over the last few years? I guess this is what the SAR reports and so forth now has come in to sort of help with the transfer responsibility of following up on potential illicit transfer of funds and so forth, so that the police is actually the one doing the investigation and maybe talking directly to the clients? Or do you believe it's the same still where the banks have to do this on a case-by-case basis and talk to them?
Yeah, it's not the same. Some of the police work are in fact now done by the banks. And that shift have, of course, been transferred in the public. So the customer are aware of that. And the people who are working with the AML in the financial sector are also aware of that. And I think they are more comfortable with that. But of course, they are not police. They are still a banking. So it's better. It's more open mind, more transparent. They have gotten some tools to spot it much bigger and the communication part. But of course, they will never be and should never be the police enforced hands in that way.
Absolutely. Now, it's really interesting, and I'm really interested to talk to you about today's topic. So we're talking about the state of AML, like the state of play for AML. What's the actual status for AML in Nordics and especially Denmark? And FCG, it's approximately a month, 6 weeks ago, where you guys came out with this report, where I found it really interesting the way that you put it together, because this is anonymous interviews with, I believe, 10 different senior stakeholders within the first and second line of defense in financial institutions in Denmark. That's been asked these really basically prone questions, and they provided unfiltered answers to really say what is actually happening, and not just sort of politically correct answers, I'd say. Just to set the scene of this, in the report, it's also reference to Europol's number of how much of the money laundering funds are actually stopped. And in Europol says that's 1%. Now, like you mentioned, you've worked with this for so many years now, and seen the investments that's gone into setting these systems up, and obviously seeing how much investments are made. It's billions of NOK and Danish coins and euros that's put into this fight against financial crime, and still seeing it's just 1% that we're able to stop. I'm curious to start a question about, or the questions about why. Why do you believe this is? Why do you think the investments that are so big aren't really making a huge difference just yet?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, I don't think that we understand the criminals. We don't understand why AML is so important. We can, from FCG report in Sweden, first of all, and then our report in Denmark, where we have been spoken to the biggest financial institutions with the top management, anonymous, we can see that they all have this factor that we need more awareness. We can post as much money in it as we want to, but if we don't understand the core challenges, it doesn't have any effect. So as I see it, the one that have been successful with this is in fact them that have been burned. Those have been sanctioned. And we've seen a lot of the big European banks been sanctioned, get fined. They still have struggle, but it's like you need to do that. When we see the Danish FSA, we can see that they are pointing fingers. They have now have a lot of inspections where they say you are not good at this and this. And it has to be like that before you can see there is a problem. You don't look in. So fundamentally, look at your own business. Fundamentally, have the board the right competences? Do they have the right focus anchored about how you do the AML work? That is, as we see it in the report and as I see it, the most critical part to fight against the money laundering.
So that's a really interesting take. And looking into the report a bit, I see a few of the respondents on some of the questions at least have highlighted that it's almost been an overcompensation now because the lack of understanding. Yeah. And that's pouring a large number of resources in, increasing headcount by a lot, and basically setting up a sort of like check the box type of compliance process where they don't look at the competitive advantage that a great compliance process can have. But taking those type of response and trying to come up with a solution, what would your recommendations be for the companies or the AML fighters within these organizations that want to get the board to really understand what the main issues are?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we should see who is in the board, who is the competences. Should we need other people in the board who understand this more clear? In general, in the banks, I think that we should have more in who is not a banking. We should have like more police folk, more tax people, more from the outside to get a diverse resource handling. Because we do not know the criminals as we should do. We're always lacking behind. Tick the box, that doesn't cover with the risk approach, which all the DFSA are telling us. How can we click the box if we have to be risk-based? Compliance is yes or no. Risk-based is not yes and no. So how do we understand the laws? So therefore, we need overall to see it from them who knows the business. So we need to not be naive. We need to not trust people because they click the box, because it's in our template to be a KYC, to be a client. We need to see the broader picture of this. Therefore, the people who are handling those people or those customers need to have another view. So, but it starts with the board, the anchored, the risk to see it, and then anchored about how do we then work with it.
So maybe even bringing in some sort of outside competence that's not necessarily sort of schooled in banking and finance, but have more of a crime preventive type of background. Would that be a recommendation?
Yeah, completely. And also not to be afraid of saying it directly. The legislation have been there for 20, 30 years. It's the last maybe 5 years we really understood this pressure. So we have tried to say it like indirect for many years. It doesn't help. We need to be much more open, much more directly, internally, externally, from the authorities to the banks, to the public, much more diversified. Yeah.
And sort of taking that one step further, what would you say is the way a modern bank or a modern regulated company should view their AML responsibility? Because we've just discussed it doesn't work with just a sort of like checkbox compliance type of setup. What is the overall AML responsibility, and what type of questions do these banks or regulated companies need to ask themselves to make sure that they're doing it properly?
Yeah, well, of course, they should see that why do we do this? To have a banking license, we have to be compliant with the banking license. And to have the activities that's in that banking license, we need to have a social contract. We need to have the trust that we handle this correctly. And to handle it correctly, we need to have enthusiasm. We need to have a passion with AML. If we look back, credit is, of course, the main thing in a bank. That's where we earn the money. Of course, then we get the market, then we get the liquidity, and etc. But now we have the AML. And in the beginning, this was like, oh, why? We don't earn any money on it. No, you don't. But use this as an advantage. And that I can't see so many firms have developed and taken into account, because now we live in 2023. Data is king. So the data we get from the customer should be a benefit going forward. And I guess that have not been in the spotlight for so many boards, and you should have that. So as I see it, you need to be much more open about collecting data, the quality of the data, and use them wisely, not only to prevent the anti-money laundering, but also to get new business areas that you can earn money to your stakeholders.
Absolutely, and this is what I've seen in a few of these discussions as well. This need to stop with the silo thinking. Like if you gather data for the KYC, this is data about the business and the persons and everybody involved that could be definitely used to drive new revenue sources, to have better processes when it comes to ESG, when it have you have insights that you didn't have before, so it all just trickles down, and it always starts with the KYC or KYB in the Know Your Business. One respondent I saw commented that it was almost at the point where he wanted a scandal to happen so that he would, or his team or her team, would get the funds they needed to really set up great processes. Yeah. I think that was such an interesting quote, and it just speaks levels as well, like how desperate maybe some of these teams are to scrape together the funds they need. Yeah. What other than sort of setting up or staging a scandal would you recommend these teams to do to get sort of the board and the rest of the company to really focus on this as an area of investment? Yeah,
well, they don't. As we spoke about before, it was going forward about the data, and data is king, and you can earn a lot of money on that. That's one thing. But also, as it is right now, you can optimize so much right now. You still have insecurities about which role do you have internally, about who does what. What is AML in the bank, what is not. So just to optimize processes, methods, use systems, use AI, use other thing just to make it much more cost beneficial at the current stage. And then going forward, use the data, not on the silo, but also look at the holistic point of view. So I would say it's not 5 years ago or 5 years more to come. Look right now, where can you be better? And there are so many ways the top management can do that, because end of the day, you will need to earn the money. And you can do that now, you can do that in the future. No more manual things. Of course, we need the people, we need the employees to think themselves. Of course, it's not robots, but we also need to invest about having the right thing on track so we can deliver the right thing as we have planned to do. And then also be more trustful for your risk assessment. I see a lot of people doing the same because we are used to doing that. And we are not developing at the same phase as the criminals. So we have to look in before we look out. So look at your risk assessment. Are we compliant with the risk assessment? Are we trustful with the product, with delivering channels, all the processes there? And is it covered as a red line in all our organization? Start there. You can get so many good points already. I see a lot of doing things because others are doing it. But if it doesn't make sense for you, then stop it. Don't be afraid of going your own way. I would just say that, because then you don't overcompensate. You do the right thing according to your business model.
I think that's such great advice, and also this notion about first principle thinking and asking yourself, are we the process that we're setting up, is this a process that is designed to hinder money laundering, or is it a process just to again check these boxes and try to look compliant, meanwhile actually not being efficient?
Yeah, because you are very limited, because you have to fit all the clients into one box. You need to rate your client as low, medium, high, more high, and you have a lot of risk rating models in between that. So you're always trying to place the customers into that risk rating. And that's very difficult. You cannot do that with all customers. You need to sometimes use your, look outside of your own areas. Because if you don't do that, you will always limit your thoughts. And then you will be too naive. You will not be able to see the customer. You have to listen. You have to be critical. You have to sometimes not just follow. I see a lot of what you can say paper compliance. With good policies, nice instruction, great SOPs, good reporting, etc. Everything on the outside looks good, but when you go deep dive, you don't do that because you are so much focused on paper compliance.
Yeah.
Walk the talk.
Yeah.
Much more.
Not just the theoretical part, but actually practical implications and operationalizing and making sure what's on the policy actually gets followed through on.
Yeah, and I also see a development in the market that people are good talking to each other behind of the firms.
Yeah,
I know we can deliver the data, which is a barrier to preventing anti-money laundering. But I see a lot of good networks. I see a lot of knowledge sharing. And that's really good, because then we need to do that when we not can share the data. We need to say, I've seen this case, what would you have done? Or have you seen that before? And then we are very good at helping each other, because we understand this is a need that helps us all. So we need to give something to get something.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And seeing a few of these respondents talk about what's the biggest bottlenecks they have within their organization. At least for me, there were 3 things that really stood out. One thing was uncertainty about roles and responsibilities within an organization. Second is what you just mentioned in terms of the data sharing and the ability to share information across both the teams and as well companies or even jurisdictions as well. And then the third would be technology and the problems that legacy systems, especially reading what the respondents in this report said. So maybe if we start off with the latter one on technology.
Yeah.
Legacy systems is highlighted as being a big bottleneck to making AML work really in a modern and efficient way.
Yeah.
For anybody starting now to implement new technology or looking at new vendors or starting a new IT project, what would your recommendations be? What do they need to consider at the very beginning?
They should, of course, think short-wise, but also long-wise. That is the very boring answer. But also have in mind we need some successful stories. So don't throw the old one down and take a big one who is ready in 2 and 3 years. That would not be a good idea. You need to have successful implementation. You need to look at your own business, see where is our problem. Is it with the transaction monitoring? Is it with the KYC, ODD, EDD? Where are the issue here? And then I would do some add-ons. If I cannot get help from my data central or my RT department, if it's too lack of the system to handle all the new data that I will need, then I will try on the short-term basis, are there any technologies I can add on? Are there any tools I can use to cover this better? So I will be compliant now and I will look at the right stuff right now. Because when we are setting the scenarios at the transaction monitoring, we don't have it all covered. And even though transaction monitoring are silo-wise, they also cover on like a spider web. Because they will eventually, if you have a lot of scenarios, they will cover each other within fraud, anti-bribery, anti-money laundering, terror, etc. They will do that. So as a mitigating actions, I will do the add-ons recurring to what are my needs. I know there's a lot of vendors out there who is really good, very fast, and also now very cheap because they have a lot of much more customers and it has developed. On the long basis, of course, we need to have more national thought. Should we do something more about this? This is an old story. I know we have some issues with the privacy. We have something with the national legislation, how to do that. And that is not something that we can solve.
Because then we're starting to dabble a bit into the second issue, which is the data sharing aspect of this all. And sort of, the bottleneck, which is data privacy. And obviously data privacy is extremely important and something that everybody needs to take very, very seriously. But on the other hand, you have the need for information to be able to combat financial crime. And these two, in my mind at least, oftentimes comes up against each other, where you have the KYC, KYB, AML part, where you want as much information as possible so that you have the more you know basically about the entities you're doing business with, the more chances you have of detecting fraud, detecting terror financing, money laundering, and so forth. But then on the other hand, you have the issues that data privacy then rises in terms of gathering, and not just gathering, but also sharing or collecting this data about the individuals, the persons within the companies, and so forth. So that's a really interesting conundrum, I think.
Yeah, and we have seen some small steps at the Danish market where we can share some information, where it's in the bubble, where you all give hand. This stays here, but it's very limited. So that's a small step. But of course, we need to do much more, and especially about the transactions, because that is the crucial part to follow the money. Where does it come from? Where is it ending? We cannot control that with the criminals. So the small steps we have taken, especially in Denmark, we need to have much more of that. But we cannot do the bank or the data centrals alone. We need much more collaboration at the national size. Because what do you want? Do you want to prevent the anti-money laundering? If you want to say yes to that, sometimes you might have to have a compromise with the privacy. Is that possible now? No, it's not. I know that the Datatilsynet in Denmark, they can have fines right away, and they can be a big ones. The DFSA cannot make the fines. They have to make police referral and etc. And we don't want that as well. So we have a dilemma approach. Just the same with the tick the box and the risk-based approach. So we have some dilemmas that we have to talk in a high level. What do we want? What do we not want? And where can we make some compromises? But as it is now, of course, we need to work under the umbrella that we have from the legislation. And that's why it's so hard.
Absolutely. No, it's I completely agree. So the last part was regarding the uncertainty of roles and responsibilities. Now, this seems, based on the guidelines and so forth that exist, that this should be a solved problems in many ways, but apparently it isn't. So what would your recommendations be for companies that struggle with the classic case of, well, I believe that's their responsibility. I believe AML should only cover this much. Meanwhile, this part of the customer life cycle should cover this part. Like, how do people or teams that just get started with it or want to know more about it understand whose responsibility AML is and what sort of that role encompasses in terms of a organizational structure?
Yeah, it's pretty funny because in the beginning it was like second line issued, then it was moved to first line, maybe in 2014 or 15 or something like that, and now it's coming back. Not that it will go away from the first line, but with the new EBA guidelines, who came into force in December, where you need that AML officer, and I think it's very important that you have a balanced competence and resource in the bank, that you both have the competence in first line and in the second line. You can't manage that. I know that when you're in second line and if you're in compliance, you need to cover many areas. It's very difficult to be a key person who knows everything in the second line. But as we see now, if you can check and challenge your first line from a second point of view, you are very long. So my recommendation would highly be that you upscale your competences, your focus on the second line. Because when I look back, the first line, people are really good. They know this. They have the governance, the risk framework in place. They have all the paper compliance. They also have the walk and talk in some ways. But the second line is immature, as I see it from my experience. We need much more compliance people or risk people to see this as another level, who can challenge the first line on terror, anti-bribery, wherever you are, or maybe also the risk rating models in the transaction monitoring scenarios to see this is good. You have some good systems, but how do you cover PEP? How do you cover the sanctions, the fraud in Switzerland, and etc.? How do you do that? Show me. So we need to have more balanced competence throughout the lines, and not only second line. Then we also say, what about third line? Internal or external audits. Do they also cover it? We also have that in mind, because that is the focus of the overall control framework, the overall management of the system. And I don't see that been covered as it is. So now we have first line who have mainly covered it, but it stops. So recommendation, more competences in more lines throughout the banks and financial institutions.
Brilliant. So to try to summarize those 3 points on the tech issue or the issue with deploying technology, recommendation is start off with more of the low-hanging fruits and then add on. So not think about a 3-year, 4-year big IT project. Think about what can we solve now with existing vendors and start off with that. Second problem, which is the on the data sharing aspect, it's still to continue to hopefully get opened up a bit more on the regulatory side, so that data sharing is actually allowed between the banks, for example.
Yeah.
And then third is the uncertainty. Follow the EBA guidelines and focus more on hiring competence in the second and third line as well as the first line, because first line is already sort of covered in many ways.
Yeah, and to add that, also have in mind that, look, what are you non-compliant with yet? People have so much hurry about what is coming. Now we know that the 6th Hvidvask directive are coming in any way. So yes, of course we should look at that now, but look backwards. Are you all covered? People forget this. It's been a culture. We just do what we are used to do. So stop up, reflect. Are we in the circle where we totally are aligned with the Bible risk assessment and the thing we have? And if yes, then you go for the upcoming regulations.
Wonderful. So I want to round off by taking the highlights from the report. So there's 5 highlights that you've mentioned, and I'm just going to run through the headlines of this, and then you can give some context to them. Sounds good?
Yeah, good.
So a rapid fire style. So competence and understanding the subject matter. What do we mean by that?
The content is that we need to think that we should know more than we do right now. People think that we are done now, but we're not. This is the tip of the iceberg. So we know what we have to do in a content that are normal bank, but we need to know more about what is coming, know more about how do the criminal works.
Sounds good. And then the second one, building capabilities.
Capabilities is that we need to have more hands than we need. We need to have more mitigating actions about how do we prevent this from happening.
The third one, better coordination and guidance by regulatory authorities.
We've seen from the Danish authorities that they have helped the business pretty much the last 2 or 3 years. That has been needed to understand the legislation. So yeah, we need to be more dialogue with them. They need to be more honest so we can help each other.
Awesome. Ongoing adoption and updating.
We need to be more we do this every year. We do this if needed. We need to be more agile. If we see something that sticks out and we don't earn money or we don't do it correctly, then fix it.
Wonderful. And the last one, a more informed process for IT.
We need to bring IT people much more in the line. This is a lot of lawyers that are working with AML. We need to have much more diverse profile and IT-minded people to help us. We need that.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. It's been a real pleasure having you at the laundry, and I can't wait to speak to you again. So take care.
Thank you so much.